1900, Houston, Texas. A small but bustling city. The oil boom had not yet erupted. Instead, Houston's economy was centered on agriculture, primarily cotton and lumber. Railroads crisscrossed the area like a spider's web. The city's skyline was evolving. Residential neighborhoods were expanding and infrastructure was developing. The population, according to that year's census, was 44,000 residents. Houston was a city on the brink of significant advancement and growth. And in just 20 years, the city's population would explode over 200% to 138,000. In 1900, Henry Philemon Attwater, H.P. Attwater, known to everyone as Professor, arrived in Houston as the Southern Pacific Railroad's industrial and agricultural expert and exhibit developer. His mission? To help advance the agricultural and industrial potential of Texas and the northern Gulf Coast. A native of England, Attwater migrated to Canada and quickly built a reputation as an internationally acclaimed naturalist, geologist, and agricultural expert. In the decade before coming to Houston, Attwater traveled throughout Texas, collecting copious numbers of specimens, lecturing, and curating exhibitions highlighting the flora and fauna of the state and the South. The railroad hoped his enthusiasm for Texas and knowledge of its resources would encourage immigration to Houston, the surrounding area, and beyond. For 13 years, he did just that, quickly becoming a fixture in Houston society. Most importantly to us, he would become the inspiration and effective spiritual founder of the Houston Museum of Natural Science. I'm Johnny Hemberger, and I'm excited to take you on a journey exploring HMNS's past and how it's inspiring our future. But every journey needs a guide, and who better to discuss the history of HMNS with than Cecilia Ottenweller, former president of the Houston History Alliance, a local historian, and author who is currently researching and writing the 115-year history of the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Cecilia has lived in the Houston area for over 40 years, and her career includes work as a broadcaster, museum exhibit developer, and marketing professional. She holds an MA in cultural sustainability, and her previous works include the recent 100-year history of the Houston Zoo. I sat down with her to talk about H.P. Attwater, an elusive yet influential figure, as well as to learn more about how HMNS came to be. Who was H.P. Attwater, and why should the listener care, to be frank?
Okay, there's a couple of different ways that I can tell you who H.P. Attwater was. I can go through his bio, when he was born, when he died, all the fabulous things that H.P. Attwater did while he was on the planet. Or I can just describe what kind of a person he was. And my favorite term for that is a dingle-doty. And that's a term from Jack Kerouac, right? Mm-hmm. And the people who burn with a light within, they have their own drummer, they're fascinated, they're passionate, and there's no way they can toe any other lines, right? H.P. Attwater was that. The man was absolutely aflame with passion for the world around him. He was fascinated by nature. He was fascinated by how it worked, why it worked, how to make best use of it. And he was infectious. That's one of the things that in every piece you read about H.P. Attwater, every time he opened his mouth or put pen to paper, he inspired, he gave birth to more passion in the people around him. He gave them courage to try to do new things, to move to new lands, to learn something different in how they were doing things. Mm-hmm. He was a remarkable man for a number of reasons. Mm-hmm. Southeast Texas, South Texas, Texas itself is a Garden of Eden. When he first came to Texas, it blew his mind. There's so much here. Professor Attwater got here and he saw all these microclimates. He saw different species. He saw animals in abundance. He saw the terrain change dramatically from one side of the state to the other. Mm. And it was deeply fascinating to him.
I've heard that he was a naturalist. What does that mean?
Naturalist has a lot of different connotations. Nowadays, professional naturalists are a little bit different from what HP was. Naturalists in the 19th century, even going back to the 18th century and a little bit beyond, were people who were, now all you scientists out there that are listening to this, don't throw eggs at the radio right now, but the way I conceive it, so this is Cecilia's definition, people who categorized nature. They sought to understand nature and to get to the wisdom of nature.
Beautiful.
Right?
Yeah.
And that in itself was something that, there was a status that came with being a naturalist. Quite often naturalists were mostly men, but there were a number of women that did this. It provided stature within society because it was the wise person, in ways kind of a wizard about the world. Mm-hmm. And HP was one of the greatest. I mean, when he died, the obituary that was written about him in the Post called him the internationally known naturalist, geologist, and retired industrial agent for the Southern Pacific Railroad. He was known by people and businesses for what he did.
So what was HP's role with the museum?
HP was the inspiration for the museum in a couple of different ways. So there were two different groups that sought to develop a museum in Houston, okay? The first was birthed in 1909, and the secretary of the organization was Clarence Brock, who went on to become the first superintendent of parks for the city of Houston. So that was called the Houston Museum and Scientific Society, okay? And their whole goal was to put together a museum, a lot like the American Museum of Natural History in New York, that would be an educational place that would bring out the natural history of Texas, specifically Southeast Texas, okay? And beyond. It wasn't just Texas. The other organization, however, began in 1914, and it was called the Progressive League. Now, in between those two timelines, H.P. Attwater had a very rich career with the Southern Pacific Railroad, developing exhibits for the railroad and developing industrial opportunities along the railroad throughout Texas, okay? Now, the Progressive League was made up of business people in Houston who were seeking to create opportunities for folks who came to Houston to create homes, to find their homes here, right? And they wanted to exhibit the potential and the richness of this region. And a museum to them was an opportunity to display that and just to share the wonder and the opportunity and the richness. Both organizations were inspired by Attwater, okay? Attwater in part for the HMNS. But the second one, the Progressive League, it wasn't just about inspiring wonder. They also wanted to create business opportunities. And that's where most of the investment was. They're the ones that actually purchased the first Attwater exhibit. There are actually two that form the foundation of the museum. They're the ones that negotiated the purchase of Attwater's exhibit. And they're the ones that put it up for exhibit at the auditorium here in Houston. And it was there for several years before it moved other places.
Was H.P. Attwater really a professor?
H.P. Attwater was not really a professor in the way that we define a professor now. I haven't found a PhD. I have not found no diplomas. I have not found anywhere where he taught in a professional institutional setting. But he was known as the professor. I'd like to say that he earned that honorary title in everything, that the way he lived, did, talked, everything. HP was known by his friends as the professor. He was actually nicknamed the professor by his mother because of all the odd creatures he would bring into the house and the pandemonium they would create. Yeah.
I wonder if she had other nicknames for him.
Oh, I bet she did. She must have been
maybe that we can't share.
No. Let's just say that I think it's a safe bet that H.P. Attwater's mother was incredibly patient.
A little about me, a little right here. Funny story. I was sitting in church one time and I was thinking about how to turn my bicycle into an airplane. Could I get enough? Remember, I'm 10 or 11 years old at this time. I'm thinking about generating enough lift. How much wingspan would I have to have? How much like gear ratios from my little 12-year-old legs to the propeller? How could I do this? And I told my mom about it after church. She goes, let's go to Ace Hardware. Let's do it. Let's figure it out. And I later asked her, that's going to shock a lot of parents probably to hear that. My mom encouraging me to build an airplane out of my bicycle.
Yeah.
My mom later said that the reason why she was patient with me in that regard and encouraged, more than just patient, encouraging in that regard, she said, I didn't actually think you would get off the ground, but you would learn an awful lot by me giving the blessing to turn you loose on this creativity and this exploration.
I want you to stay with that for just a moment, because I think that that's what the museum is as well. The museum is the epitome of the inspiring, patient, inviting spirit that you're describing from your, I know I had from my mom and my father too. You know, come in, get your wonder on, right? I used to teach here. I used to teach 15,000 fourth graders a year here many years ago. I had a lion's skull in my classroom. And one of the things I would teach kids about was teeth. How do you know what an animal eats? And then I would take the lion skull and I would open it up in front of their faces and go, what do you think that eats? Right? Well, that's what HP was doing. When he put together an exhibit, it wasn't a dry set of cases where everything had little itty-bitty labels. He had some of that going on. But when he opened the exhibit, when the first exhibit opened at the Houston Auditorium, at the new auditorium downtown, they described it with grapevines as big as a tree draping across it. He had a full mounted buffalo that when it was alive was 3,600 pounds. He had full mounted alligators. He had all these things so that when you walked in, the only thing, and they probably didn't say this back then, but was, damn. Got
to put a PG rating on this now.
Yeah, right. This is so much bigger a world than I ever could have imagined. What's really important about all of this with H.P. Attwater is he was also a very strong and vocal advocate for the preservation and conservation of resources, okay? He was the National Audubon Society president. As the president of the National Audubon Society, he was highly influential in the creation of laws protecting birds and hunting birds for sport. Attwater published extensively articles in the newspapers talking about the impact of human activities on bird populations.
Back in the early 1900s.
Oh yeah, very much so. And what's just heartbreaking is that one of his pieces just after, I think it was in the 1910s, where he talked about that when he first came to Texas, the bird populations were such that in 1910, he said they had decreased by 40%.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
So that's the other aspect of citizen scientists. That's the other role of the museum in all of this. That's what H.P. Attwater was about. Appreciate, understand, be knowledgeable, know how to develop those resources, but be careful with hubris.
Beautiful.
You need to know you need to know more than just what it is. You need to know how to steward it. You need to know how to be respectful, right? Those resources are there, but they took a long time to develop. And he wrote about how short of a time it took for humans, for shooting for sport to just indiscriminately kill animals. Plus, on top of that, he was really big on trying to educate people here about animals not being in competition for what it was we were doing. Believe it or not, just after the turn of the 20th century, there was a huge push along the Gulf Coast to kill pelicans.
Wow.
Pelicans were very rare because of the humans killing them, because they viewed them as competition for their fishing.
Mhm.
And it took Attwater and other people like him to point out they're not competing with you.
Yeah.
They're not stealing their catches. Matter of fact, when you're looking at the grains in the field and all the grasses and everything else you're developing, when you see birds out there in your fields, they're not just eating some of the grain, they're eating the insects.
Yep.
They're helping you.
Right.
Right?
It's kind of how we use, a lot of farmers use bats now.
Mm-hmm.
To, instead of spraying pesticides.
Right.
Hey, nature's already figured this out.
Now, you have to be mindful of the fact that there really was a zeitgeist at that period of time where folks would come in and they would take a look at the open prairie and they would almost feel guilt over the fact that it was undeveloped, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a change in thinking in the last 100 plus years as far as how we look at the natural world. But once again, let's go back to what the mission of the museum is, right? Yes, it inspires people going into fields that are science-based. Absolutely. What it also does is inspires people to appreciate what's around them. That a full life is not just what's in front of you. It's underneath your feet. It's around you. It's in the air. How often do you miss seeing a bald eagle because you weren't looking up? Mm-hmm. You come in here and then suddenly it's like, oh, that's wonderful. I'm wonderful.
Mm-hmm. The Attwater prairie chicken. I'm going to put that on the table and just set that spark off. Can you talk about the Attwater chicken?
The Attwater prairie chicken.
And where that leads us in conversation, I'm sure is going to be wild.
Oh, I'm sure. Okay, so Attwater, nobody who wrote about Texas birds, wildlife, natural history in the late 19th and early 20th century, there was nobody who wrote about those subjects without influence from Attwater. Mm-hmm. Attwater was just the granddaddy of the naturalists in this region. And a number of species were named after him, honoring him for his role in, identifying, protecting, naming, the world around us. One of those species was the Attwater prairie chicken, which we hear a lot about, which is kind of a conundrum because the animal is so dramatically threatened. Mm-hmm. The Attwater prairie chicken was once hugely abundant in this area, and now its habitat is almost completely gone. Now, as far as chickens are concerned, though, Professor Attwater was passionate about birds. And there's this anecdote I came across when I was doing my research about him that just gave me the giggles. I mean, he was very much a human, okay? He had his ups and he had his downs. Sure. And he had a favorite chicken. And a notable person from the Audubon Society and from the Northeast was visiting down in Houston. And Attwater was passionate about trying to show how humans could live with nature without destroying it. And one of the animals that was hugely threatened at the time were hawks, okay? And the animal he's describing later became known as the red-tailed hawk. So he had a young man had caught a red-tailed hawk, and he had put it at in his aviarium that he had an aviary he had at his house in the Montrose. And he was trying to show the person from the Audubon that no, hawks are kind. They do not eat chickens. They do not eat the domestic fowl. I will prove this to you. And he had this hawk in his aviary and had been giving the hawk a choice between live rats and chicken meat. Yeah. And every time the hawk would eat the live rats, never eat the chicken meat. So while the Audubon guy was there, he said, "This is my favorite chicken." He literally had a favorite pet chicken. It was a little girl chicken that just liked to sit in his hand and just kind of cluck. So he put the chicken in the aviary with the hawk, and they stood there outside of the aviary and watched, and the hawk just was like, "I don't care. Yeah, it's chicken. I don't care. I'm not hungry. No problem." And they just watched it for a bit, and HP is like, "Yes, see, the hawk will not eat the chicken." Well, then Attwater's wife comes in, and she's all upset because the cows of the next door neighbor are now in Attwater's testing garden. He had this place in the Montrose on Genesee Street that he had this incredible land where he had a big garden where he was testing different species. So he gets all upset, and he and the Audubon guy go running out of the house, and they chase off the cows. And they come back in, and just as they come in, they hear this terrible squeal from this pet chicken, and the hawk has landed on it, is ripping its throat out.
Oh my goodness.
And just as the Audubon guy is beginning to suggest, well, perhaps we can euthanize it and mount it, before he even got the rest of the sentence out, Attwater had grabbed an axe and murdered the hawk.
Oh my.
Just chopped it to bits.
So we know that H.P. Attwater was a very charismatic man, very influential man, both in the history of this museum and just his personal life at the time and professional life at the time. How in 2024, as of recording, how can H.P. Attwater inspire us and the museum today? How is he relevant to us today?
Oh, the relevance of H.P. Attwater has never gone away. H.P. was all about wonder, understanding, inspiring, including, educating. Anybody who came within his sphere of influence was touched by that spirit within him. HP never had kids. He's got children everywhere, though. Every person who listened to them, everybody who heard his lectures or read his pieces, they never failed to walk away without a sense of, wow. And this museum is a child of H.P. Attwater.
So, Cecilia, the President's Society has evolved, for lack of a better word, into the H.P. Attwater Society. Is that a good move, in your opinion?
It's a fantastic move. It's a fantastic move. It's an appropriate move. Mm-hmm. This museum was born out of the passion of the business leaders, the municipal leaders, wanting to inspire, to not just capitalize on the resources around them, but to collect them and to know more about them, and the sense of wonder about the world around us and what this area offers us. Those business leaders, those civic leaders, are the ones that made this museum happen against a lot of odds. And H.P. Attwater inspired them to continue on with the mission, even though there wasn't enough money, even though they couldn't really find a building, even though there were other interests that were battling against it. It survived. It survived, and then it thrived. H.P. Attwater was all about including people, about communicating the wonder of the world around him, about leading other people into that understanding. The President's Society is and should be always that. Mm-hmm. People who don't just understand, but are curious, who are passionate, who are investors in future, who are philanthropists, who understand that when we die, we don't take the money with us. The best thing to do with it is to invest in the generations that follow us and to make sure they never forget who they are, where they come from, and what their potential is. And that they have a responsibility to not just live in the world, but to partner with the world, to steward the world, to work with other people, to be in community with the rest of the world. I can't think of a better move for the museum than to name it after him.
H.P. Attwater, the man, the myth, and the should-be legend. H.P. Attwater was instrumental in HMNS's creation, and our annual fund donor society has been instrumental in HMNS's growth and continued success. Our donors are passionate and enlightened individuals who, like H.P. Attwater, have an insatiable thirst for knowledge and understanding of the intricacies of our natural world. The H.P. Attwater Society aims to kindle intellectual curiosity and nurture a love for learning in its members through enriching programming and edifying events. Annual membership to HMNS's HP Attwater Society consists of 4 tiers: Conservationist, Champion, Collector, and Curator Circle. Each tier entitling donors to a variety of benefits across the museum. And for the first time, we are offering individuals under 40 a 50% discount, specifically at the Conservationist level. Visitors of all ages leave our halls amazed by our universe and our place in it, and we want to make sure to keep that childlike wonder alive, especially with our most generous supporters. If you're not already involved, we invite you to join us. So dare to grow with HMNS, and in the immortal words of the Enlightenment, sapere aude, dare to know.